Greetings, friends. Very interesting processes are taking place on the territory of so-called Russia. There, Russian propaganda combined with military failures drives Russian society into a state of constant hysteria. Well, we have news, of course, one is better than the other. And every day is a fierce total madness in such a shock and even in some despair. We are already crazy in this territory. Yesterday Solovyov had a masterpiece broadcast on the channel. Russian propagandists whined for an hour about how Russians are constantly scared. You guys are all scared, you are neurasthenic. Constant hysteria and fear forces Russians to fight against each other more and more often. They are really inadequate. Both one and the other. Well, this is absolutely crazy. And here the key question is, what will happen to Russian society after the Russian army is unable to fight against Ukraine? And when the SVO begins, they will start killing each other. Well, that is, they are already morally ready for this. This is a civil war. The prospects, in my opinion, are simply excellent and will be even better in the so-called Russia, which is confidently heading for confrontation within the so-called Russia itself. You, friends, be sure to subscribe to my channel right now, like this video and leave any comment under it. And this is what I want to talk about with you today. Russian propagandists and ordinary Russians in general have many reasons to be afraid and hysterical. Let's take Belgorod, for example. It's hard to admit, but it's a fact. Belgorod, Bryansk, and Kursk regions are already the front line. This is actually a front. They took Kiev so successfully in 2 days that now they are thinking how to do it in order to protect Belgorod and are building defense lines there. And the Russian army, as you know, likes to drop bombs on Belgorod. And yesterday they just found another one that didn't break. The Russians were shocked. As the self-proclaimed governor himself said, the city is already starting to recover a little from the shock. The sappers found the ammunition near a nearby house. By decision of the Regional Commission on Emergency Situations, the state of emergency at the regional level was introduced. Such news does not bring peace to Russian society, to put it mildly. The situation is not easy, you and I are now in a state of extreme mental anxiety, and permanently so. And so, against this background of constant stress, the Russians are looking for where to direct their aggression. And they start fighting against each other. And still without a weapon. Yesterday she arranged a total act around the shaman. Before that, they fought gender fascism and Asian Chinese fascism. There is such a very patriotic singer shaman in Russia, he is financed, including from the Russian budget, to motivate Russians to die more actively for the interests of Vladimir Putin. And so shaman released a very interesting clip on Hitler's birthday, which for some reason did not please the Russian propagandists, who began to compare shaman with the Nazis. And not only with them. Well, I don't know, maybe the costume designer rewatched Police Academy, this scene in the Blue Oyster Bar. And what is interesting here is that while one propagandist working on Solovyov's channel was slandering shaman, another propagandist from Solovyov's channel began to stand up for him. You see, today I am wearing a leather jacket, despite the fact that it is hot here, so I decided to support Yaroslav Dronov. And in the end, well, it reminds a little of the Russian patriot Hitler Jugend, what's so bad about it? But the songs are patriotic. Ha ha. The Russians planted their musician. Because he resembles the Hitler Youth. Hitler was, by the way, personally a very brave person. The controversy surrounding the shaman in Russian society has been going on for several days. And even there they start threatening each other. And in the end, Russian propagandists come to the conclusion that if Smersh had been there, shaman would still have been shot. Now they would have insisted that Smersh come for the shaman. He shot him behind the garage without trial or investigation. Because someone thought of something. A separate topic that worries Russian propagandists in particular is the mass distribution of figurines. If you didn't know, the other day in so-called Russia, Russian propagandists started receiving busts of Zhukov. And they were quite scared. And sometimes, you know, they send out figurines to everyone right now. I accept parcels from everyone. But already with some caution actually. I don't know who exactly, what kind of unknown good people are doing this newsletter, but I have to admit it's brilliant. And it works. Regularly, I also receive such messages in my chat. And what, a point press. Point is you have a press. And we don't know how many bookmarks and sleepers we have here. The mouthpieces of the war against Ukraine are horrified, they are very afraid, because they realize that the same thing can happen to them as to the conquered Tatars, because they thought to call for genocide against Ukrainians and not bear any responsibility for it. And here it turns out that responsibility can come to them where they are not expecting it. And in connection with this, Russian propagandists are forced to cancel mass events. So the question arises, how to conduct creative meetings? There was no such thing as people coming empty-handed. That's how they imagine now in the current conditions with these parcels. Ha 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 ha, laugh, the situation worsens for them also because they start attacking each other in public. And in principle, quarrels between Russian patriots no longer surprise anyone. And they are crying again, but already in the direction of us, Pushilin and anyone else. Separately, it is very offensive to Russian propagandists that other Russian propagandists, but as if they are oppositional, support the war against Ukraine. So, some propagandists call other propagandists the security guards, because they defend the position of the Kremlin. Well, okay, let's say that we are security. And who are you then? And they, those who call Solovyov's propagandists the security guard, are a revolutionary force. Pasha Gubarev has already said everything. The KRP is a potential revolutionary force in relation to the mafia government. Add to all this soup the massive creation of the PMC in so-called Russia, when every little czar wants to have his own private army, which makes even a handsome man burn out. Today we went to deal with the newly created PMCs. All PMC Vok, PMC Reduta and so on. Each animal in pairs. He is perfectly aware of what this is all about. When many private armies are created in so-called Russia, sooner or later they will defend their private interests and fight against each other, or against the Russian state or what is left of it. But what is separately interesting? So Prigozhin listed several PMCs, including Redut PMC, which is Shoigu's PMC. But for some reason I forgot to mention the Convoy PMC, which is formally headed by Aksionov, but also managed by Prigozhin. Let's write a letter to Biden already. In short, the situation is very interesting. The number of private armies in so-called Russia is constantly increasing, and Russians are constantly under stress and nervous. Russian propagandists add to the panic by talking about the Ukrainian counteroffensive. And against this background, the still unarmed war of all against all begins. Veterans of the Maidan, who fled to Russia, against the patriots. Stalinist patriots against monarchist patriots. Russian society is being segregated, divided into more and more different groups. And they begin to conflict with each other. It's just lip service now, but who knows what will happen next. But of course, as always, only Ukraine is to blame for everything. After all, by and large, what is implemented in us now in the media sphere is Ukraine. As I have already said many times, in my personal opinion, a revolutionary situation can really arise in Russia. And we can see how Russian society is currently seething, opposing each other, how Russians are constantly getting into trouble and wishing each other death. And under favorable circumstances, in the event of major victories of the armed forces, it can really explode there. In general, a perfect picture for February 17th of the last century. Well, what will happen next? Where will the next part of the hysteria go? Here everyone will be treated with everyone, new national republics will be born, which will fight among themselves. This is a civil war. And our task with you is to make it happen as soon as possible. Therefore, friends, we continue to support the Ukrainian army and help it. Just the other day, the 35th Marine Brigade received 3 more much-needed drones from you. And we continue to work on providing the armed forces of Ukraine, while the Russians complain that they cannot raise funds. People are forced to beg and walk with an outstretched hand. However, I must admit that sometimes they have successful meetings. Then when they force business to help the Russian army. And this means that we have to respond to this with even greater support for the Ukrainian army, because only the Ukrainian army is able to ensure our existence with you, the existence of our country, and provoke a temporary collapse of the existing misunderstanding called the Russian Federation. And I, friends, am sure that this will happen in our lifetime.